Hello, I'm Kevin Rogers. Tonight we have Tom Daly, and he's going to speak on a new apologetics. Well, at least kind of new. Anyway, I'll hand it over now to Tom, and he can introduce the topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi everybody. Um, yeah, I want to talk about a sort of a new apologetics. There are new components, and we're going to do that sort of roughly using this agenda. Uh, as usual, some sort of introduction and background, and giving some idea of why this talk. Then we're going to talk about the book by Sean McDowell, Apologetics for an Ever-Changing Culture. Change, a practical example, um, and then get into some of the changes that are necessitating some changes in our apologetics. And then a bit of a summary and some takeaways. Uh, And there's a few things that I really was thinking about as I was preparing this talk, which has been sort of long in the making. I've been thinking about this for most of the year and a little bit before. And our society in the West is really searching for meaning. And I came across this quote from Dostoevsky in the Brothers Karamazov, which I have read, but probably after reading this, I'll read again. Um, it's worth just reading out. The mystery of human existence lies not just in staying alive, but in finding something to live for. And if we think back to my last talk on the surprising rebirth of faith in God, this is one of the things that's happening, particularly with our youth, is that their naturalism, their physicalism, their secularism is leaving them with nowhere to go. And they're discovering that humanity needs four things: love, identity, significance, and purpose. And if you like, this quote, which is from the book that we're going to look at, Apologetics from an Ever-Changing Culture, is really, if you like, a restatement of, I think it's St Augustine, our heart is restless until it finds its rest in you. I think that's what it's getting at. Anyway, so this is the primary catalyst. A new book came out in the middle of the year. Even though I was sort of thinking about this and had been thinking about this for a while, there was a podcast which I've got linked there from Biola, which, for those who don't know, is an apologetics organization, but it's also a university. So the Bible Institute of LA. I've mentioned this before. And in fact, for those of you who remember talking to the Reasons to Believe guys, they work very closely with Sean and with many of the folks from Biola. Anyway, Sean has edited this book and brought together a whole lot of contributors. And it's a really practical guide for what's needed or what do we need? What are some of the things that we need to think about when we're thinking about apologetics and indeed evangelism in 2025? And so much of this is inspired by this book and informed to a good deal by the book, but with many other influences, as we'll see. Let's me be clear. Some people think that apologetics is not that critical. Some people think that um, uh, what's it called? Suppositional apologetics is all you need, which is the idea that, just assume the Bible and the Christian faith is true, then argue it from there. I don't take that approach. I don't believe that apologetics is unneeded by the church or a side issue. I think we have a lot of biblical warrant for the fact that we need and we should all be apologists in one way or another. But the need for a new apologetics doesn't preclude traditional apologetics, what we might call traditional apologetics. And unlike so there's not a either or here, there's sort of a both and. And unlike many of my talks here at Reasonable Faith or for Reasonable Faith, where I think I have, and we often uh, have in the past, tried to engage both secular and Christian audience. I think I'm tonight, particularly and primarily, perhaps even exclusively, really assuming that I'm talking to an audience of faith. That said, I hope there's something in here for people who might happen upon the video later and think, oh, well, is there anything here for me? I think some of the analysis might be still useful for secular, at least seeking secular people. Um, Again, I think it's become clear to me over the years that there's two reasons for apologetics. One is to believers to encourage and strengthen the faith that they already have, and the second is really to break down the barriers and to create opportunities for non-believers. And I think to one and to two, I think an unexamined faith is a vulnerable faith, whether it's a faith in secularism, naturalism, physicalism. And it's interesting, as a lot of people formerly avowed atheists are actually re-examining and coming to Christian faith, it's their examination of their worldview that's actually causing that. So I think when you read about a Larry Sanger or an Ali Hershey or whoever coming to faith, you'll see a lot of the times it's because they've re-examined their presuppositions. Previously, they're staunchly held suppositions. So I think in examining our faith, whether it's a Christian faith or a secular faith, I think is a really valuable thing to do. And this still challenges me and animates me. I couldn't find my original slide from years ago that I had where it was an Orthodox priest hearing confession. So this image is from Sora, but the sorry, but the article, the original article was on the Christian satire site, the Babylon Bee, and the caption was praying for our young kids before they go off to university, they protected from all those nasty atheist arguments that we never prepared them for. And this does animate me because as the body, not just our pastors and our leaders, but I think as the body, that's true and continues to be true in a world where our technology is just breakneck speed changing our culture. And we'll see. I think I can substantiate this as we go through the talk. So bear with me. So let's look at the book that sort of was the main driver in many ways for tonight's talk. And it's got three parts. So we'll just have a bit of a look at the outline, and then just have a look at a whole heap of quotes that I took as I was reading the book. Now, I don't know how many folks here read books on Kindle. I read books on Kindle all the time and I read physical books. One of the nice things about Kindle is you can highlight the notes and they'll go on to, and if you subscribe to the Goodreads website, you you can actually have those notes go from your Kindle and they go and they get listed online. You can go back and review them afterwards and search them. It's a lot more convenient than highlighting in a physical book because you've got no way of indexing and coming back or searching them. And so that's what many of the quotes here are in the book. I've highlighted it in my Kindle as I've gone past, and then I've come back in my talk preparation, and I've actually then looked through the quotes that I've taken as I've gone and read through the book. It's actually a really cool addition to reading a book. It gives you an extra capacity. Anyway, that's the background to what we're going to look at for the next 3 or 4 slides and the quotes from the book as we go through. Section 1, part 1 is about a new culture, but specifically here a new culture in apologetics. And a new culture needed a new culture in the world that we live in. We'll talk more about that later. But therefore, a new response in our apologetics as well. And the focus is very much on the attitude and the tone of our communication, and how our communication style is as critical as what we're actually saying. It really tries to give a lot of contributions. The book has a lot of contributions from people who are doing youth ministry, street ministry, pastoring churches, teaching in schools, who are doing things on the ground. Oh, and I should say one other thing about the book before we proceed, and that is that Sean McDowell has edited this book, but he's got contributions from experts in their field. So if he's talking about people doing street apologetics, and I was on camp in Germany with a gentleman, with a couple of people actually from that local church who do street apologetics and look after street people in the drug sector, if you like, in the homeless sector. And in fact, my daughter-in-law has been serving and helping look after mental health and the physical needs in the red light district in Berlin. So these are people that Sean McDowell has assembled that are experts and who are really living out and teaching what they actually study, if you like. So there's lots of different contributors. Sometimes I'm using their names. Sometimes my notes come from sections where I haven't captured the names. So I just put it down that it's in the book. So very much a focus on the attitude and the tone of what we're doing. It's pretty obvious that relational apologetics and the increased need for empathy and humility is key in our divided world, in our social media saturated online troll world. But there's some things that really it reminded me of, and that have been true only in, they haven't always been true in my life when I've been talking to people. Can we make common cause with people who hold different views than what we do? So, for instance, when I work at the university with very secular people trying to protect kids from online sexual abuse, I'm making common cause with people who hold views very, very informed by critical theory, if you like, very woke, very secular views. But I'm making common cause and building relationships because it's the world we live in, and we share that common cause. And I let them know what my worldview is and why I'm doing it. But also, I was one of these angry online contributors, and this was a great reminder. Is my heart actually breaking for somebody who's suffering, somebody who's actually suffering online, or am I just getting angry? And the need for humility. Mark Sayers, who's a pastor and apologist and a cultural commentator out of Red Church in Melbourne, he often says that he's praying for a generation of new, young, humble leaders. And of course, as we get older, we get more inflexible. Often we get more inflexible, and remaining humble becomes a larger challenge, particularly when what we have done is built some expertise, some experience, and some confidence in not making the mistakes that perhaps we've made. And of course, they make the comment in part one that everything needs to be anchored in scripture. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that they tackle in the book is the idea of relativism. And they quote secular psychologists, I don't know them, Edmund Burke and Lord Agrano, but they're pointing out how much moral relativism is a major cause of anxiety amongst Americans. Well, let me go further. I just came back from 3 weeks in Ireland. And one of the things my wife and I love to do in a place is go on walking tours. And one of the young guys in Galway was showing us the failures of the church, and they went to some museums describing what would happen to pregnant women who were found out to be pregnant and unwed, and they were describing the great faults of and real faults of the church. They found they found great covers up of sewers where lots of children were disposed of in sewers, and it made me reminded me of dominion and the history from ancient Rome, where it was quite okay to throw away your kids, and that was something that is well documented, that before Christianity changed. And so a you've got generations, as this guide was attesting to. You've got generations in previously Catholic, staunchly Catholic Ireland that discovered all these failings of the church, along with the paedophile and child abuse scandals, and they're rightly offended and outraged and hurt and confused. Why is this tied to relativism? Because when I challenged the guy, I said, "Well, okay, you've got 56,000 women who are put into institutions to have their children taken away from them, but and those are sins, and they were often abused in those church institutions." And I said, "But I looked up the figures, and I said, you've got 10,000 abortions per year in Ireland now. Are we going to are we going to find that your kids or grandkids are actually having the same experience of moral outrage when they grow up?" And he then went on to explain how morality is completely relative. And I'm going, "Really? But I thought you said it was wrong." And at that point, he sort of walked off and didn't really want to talk to me much more. I just thought that was such a practical example of where the rubber meets the road of what relativism does, because he hadn't really examined that, and he hadn't really examined the implications of his worldview and how relativism set him with no foundation. I don't know. I found it a really contemporary example of what we talk about when we talk about the issues of relativism, of the fact that if you like, and for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, I imagine most people are, but it's sort of like the Oprah view of the world. You do your truth and I'll do my truth. Anyway, there was one particular section in the book from Josh McDowell, Sean McDowell's father, who wrote some of the original and very old apologetics books. I think answers that questions that require an answer, something like that. I think I butchered that, but more than a carpenter. And in this contribution in the book, he just basically argues relationship, listening, and much more respectful dialogue. And that's the responsibility of the Christian. It's not the responsibility of the secular person. And I really liked this section and the focus in the podcast on it, because in my prep for Reasonable Faith after and during COVID, in the prep for my talk titled COVID Technology in the Church, I came to the realization that in this technology world, where where all of our kids were being marketed to 24/7, then it was dialogue, not monologue, that was going to influence them, and listening and actually hearing them. I had one young man over coffee one morning. He said to me, he said, Tom, he said, this is really comforting. He said, because he said, not that I actually understand all the answers, because certainly I didn't have all the answers. He said, I just needed to know that somebody had actually thought about this. What he meant was somebody he trusted in dialogue had actually thought about his deep questions and actually given them some thought, and the fact that there probably were reasonable answers. So really like that section, number one in the book. Number two, um, uh, number two section, and I'm going to have to go a little bit more briefly, otherwise we'll be here for 2 hours. Was really new methods of defending our faith. Storytelling, the importance of that, that's not new, but it's new when you do it on social media and online, and it takes on a new importance. Apologetics in the home, absolutely always been important, but more important now that our kids are being marketed to 24/7. Dumping them off at youth group on a Friday night or expecting Sunday school on a Sunday morning for an hour to actually influence them and prepare them for all those nasty atheist and for all those nasty atheist arguments, that no longer cuts it. And imagination, you know, show that the gospel is good and then show that it's true, if you like. We've touched on that in my last talk as well. So understand ways of finding truth and meaning. Again, this is more about emotional EQ, emotional intelligence, and then perspective taking. The ability to actually steel man somebody else's argument by saying, let me actually repeat back to you what I think you're trying to tell me. And when I can state your argument in a way that you're happy, then we can move on. Or perhaps you you can tell you can do the same thing with me. It's a lengthy process, but boy oh boy, is it actually rewarding? Because what you do is you find common ground and you're ending up showing respect to your dialogue partner as you're doing it. And then, of course, a very common thing these days is deconstruction and doubt. And you can read the quotes here. I don't have time to go over them. And like always, I'll post my slides. I've tried to validate what I've got in here, uh, either from the quotes from the book or links to articles I've used to validate things. Right. And there's a couple of things here. This comment from Alan Parr. It's really hard when you get success to stay humble. I think it's very, very much like a carpenter. It's just a risk that you're going to get splinters. But I think it becomes much more difficult in our online worlds, and potentially if you have a successful ministry of any sort. And we are being confronted with issues of doubt now, a lot of the time from people who were believers and now have really powerful online ministries. So they're very informed about the gospel. They're very informed about the scriptures. And so they're often a stumbling block for our kids and a aid to our kids actually deconstructing. So there's a whole section on doubt as well. Part three, and this is where we're going to spend almost the rest of the talk. New challenges. Urban apologetics. This is sort of like the one-on-one and apologetics in the street. Homosexuality, all sorts of sexual matters. But how do you talk about these things with grace and civility rather than having shrill conversations? Defending femininity, feminism. I think we've gone from 2.0 to 3.0. But why Jesus is good for women, and there's a number of female apologists in the book, which is sort of good. Years ago, one of my friends in California asked me, said, "Tom, where are all my sisters in the apologetic fields?" And I think today there are a lot more arguing and talking to women, which I think is a good thing. And I really need you to hold that comment in mind, that I've just said that that's a really good thing. And I am not going to contradict that, but I am going to come back to that. Critiquing critical theory. I think everybody knows that critical theory largely sort of is the technical term for what is the more common term of that we would use as woke. But woke can be uh, an offensive term to some people. But Neil Shenvi is an academic and has gone, and he's an expert in all of the original texts that actually for critical theory. He's really worth listening to and reading. Um, mental health. Mental health is a huge apologetic issue in our churches, beyond our churches, in our Western world. Beyond our Western world, of course, but for different issues, war, famine, um, disease, etc., in the developing world, um, and engaging in the transgender debate again with civility and respect, and then engaging New Age, which is a lot more common than what we actually think about. Like, and just to give you an idea, a flavor from the book, you know, being uninformed about topics such as the difference between gender dysphoria and autogynephilia. Autogynephilia. I didn't even know what the term was. It essentially means to get aroused, as a man, to get aroused as thinking about yourself as a woman. I mean, the, being uneducated about these things doesn't either make them go away, nor does it help us to be engaged with people who are actually, or families who are being affected by this. And I can tell you, I have one family that I care deeply about, and I'm going to keep this vague, where at their school, there is a whole group of girls who have decided that they're boys. This is a Christian school. And they're dealing with it. So being uninformed or being angry doesn't help. But just to show you how rapid the change is, back in 2013, the New York Times hadn't even printed the word non-binary, and then let's keep there's really practical things in the book. Like, keep in mind that I hope for our lesbian, gay, bisexual, homosexual friends and family is not straightness, it's holiness. And we've got to get the order right. And my point being is, at this point, I'll recommend the book as being a great resource and a really interesting and challenging resource. And just to give it a bit more skin to that, Lee Strobel was interviewed, again, relationships, and he's encouraged by growth of spiritual discovery groups, small settings where a pair of Christians engage in candid conversations. Like, that was so good when I realized dialogue, not monologue, is key. How great to see people who are influential in the apologetic world saying the same thing. I feel like I feel like it's just a confirmation of what I was already seeing. So that was particularly nice for me. But there's other things that we can realize as well. I was having this conversation with somebody just recently, but I've seen Rick Warren, Tim Keller, Mark Sayers make this point. There's a friend of mine, Brian, you remember Alan Packer? He led a group for people who were retiring because he realized that the church has no theology of work. And we regularly get people who want to make a contribution to their church, and they might be, brilliant musicians is easier, but painters, novelists, composers, IT people, whatever, and they'll ask them to sharpen the pencils or join the meeting team or join the kitchen team, all of which are good things. But frankly, our pastors aren't in a position to be able to make use of those real world skills to engage with the outside world. Rick Warren, Tim Keller in particular, he had Yo-Yo Ma as part of his congregation in Redeemer, and Yo-Yo Ma says that part of the reason he was in that church is because Tim Keller appreciated the fact that he had this life outside of the church and that he had influence beyond the church, beyond the four walls. Anyway, I've lingered on that too long, but you get the point. And this is true. Sean McDowell points out that as Christians, and certainly this has been true of me, I hope it's less true. We sometimes, and perhaps even often, and especially online, we have a posture of defensiveness and fear towards the culture. Um, and I'll talk about that a bit more. But I'll give you an example. I wanted at our church to study all those kids that lost their faith years ago. And I went to the gentleman who I thought was, and it wasn't the pastor, but I went to the gentleman who I thought was best placed, big-hearted, one of a man I totally admire. But he said, "Oh no, no. He was not interested at all." And in fact, I found that to be a sort of a common thing. But I wanted to study deconversion because I wanted to know how to prevent it. And John Marriott has a section in the book about just that. And you can read the things about doubt, and and so many things from this book correlate with the data. One of the big takeaways, there were five things in the Faith of Exiles, the book by David Kinnaman and Barner, that were hallmarks of those kids who kept. So the 10% of kids in the last 20 or 30 years that have kept their faith rather than lost it as they've gone to later years of high school, university, and then early adulthood. And two of those five things were, firstly, was to have their doubts and their questions taken seriously, and the second one was intergenerational um, relationships. So two things out of the five, I can't remember the other three, that highly correlated with young people keeping rather than walking away from their faith in our current culture. So that's more than touched upon in this book. And it's interesting, again, relationship. Uh, there was a quote, the quote is from the book, but it's actually from Kenneth Burke, who's a philosopher. But you persuade a man only in as so far as you can talk his language by speech, gesture, tonality, order, image, attitude, idea, and identifying your ways with him. People who have suffered something have a ministry to people who have suffered the same sort of thing. Um, and I remember Kathy Keller in one of her talks saying that when she and Tim first moved to New York, they had to police their use of Christianese so that they could relate and be able to communicate with the culture and with the people and the individuals in New York. And she had a good article on that, which no doubt one of the AI engines could find for us, but I don't have linked. So let me just do a quick time check. Oh, we're going all right. Okay, so I said we're going to really focus on the things that have changed that we need to address in our new apologetic. So, for instance, when Paul went to talk to the Athenians in the Areopagus, he talked philosophy. He talked idolatry. Those things are true today. But what Paul didn't make any reference to was the division on social media. Now, let's not fault him for that, because the world has changed drastically and quickly. And these are just some of the ways that we know. I mean, look, this was just off the top of my head as I quickly prepared this slide. But actually, we've touched upon this change previously, and this will be the second time I think or third time I've even included the talk by Matt Gray at Reasonable Faith Adelaide from a number of years ago. And he pointed out, and I'm quoting here directly from 61:59 of that video, 61 minutes, 59 seconds, which I note, it's good, he's gone over time as well, that cultural change has taken place and we did not have to go anywhere. And I had this conversation with a church leader just recently. And frankly, he resisted the idea. But the point I tried to make is that if I have some friends going to mission early next year, they've already been there, they're home, getting prepared, learning the language, and in Bible school, and they're preparing to take them and their 3 kids back to West Timor in the early part of next year. So they're learning they're learning Indonesian, they're learning local languages and customs. And other friends now living in Chile, actually back here for 6 months interim, but they've learned Spanish and they've learned a lot of local customs so that they can actually communicate the gospel and have a relationship with people and care about them. Well, what Matt said, and what I try to underscore, is that cultural change has taken place and we didn't have to go anywhere. So if we're only capable of talking the language of the 1970s, if we're only comfortable talking about the culture of the 1980s, if we get angry about all the changes or we get resistant to learning anything about them, and I'm not saying we can learn all about them, then how are we going to communicate with the digital natives that are our kids and our grandkids and our friends and our families' kids and grandkids? How are we going to be able to communicate? How are we going to be able to empathize? How are we going to be able to relate? It would be like Paul going to the Areopagus and talking Aramaic um, about some esoteric feature of the Hebrew Torah. I mean, and we're told that Paul was successful because even though he got bounced out of there, many believed and they wanted to hear more from him. And this is really difficult, but if you don't take anything else away, I'd love to think that somebody would have a conversation based on this talk about, huh, huh, maybe, maybe the culture has changed so much that I do need to learn some things about how to communicate in this new culture. Thinking about it like my friends who are going to West Timor, or those that are living in Chile, or missionaries who go anywhere. Matt's so right that we didn't have to go anywhere, and yet culture has changed so rapidly, and more rapidly than for our parents or grandparents. This is also an AI generated image. Um, you know that I got my quote a little bit mixed up earlier about the source of that Babylon Bee praying for our kids before they go off to college. Um, but it was actually an author. This actually does come from an Orthodox priest. I heard this quote from an Orthodox priest that many of the sins and crimes that he heard confessions for were not technically possible in the near past, and that was about 10 years ago when I was talking on morality here at Reasonable or For Reasonable Faith. But high-speed internet porn and deep fakes, revenge porn. Um, and there was you can go to internet sites that'll help you commit adultery and then help you cover it up. Those sorts of sins just weren't possible. Many types of sexual abuse, you get the idea, right? But what about cyberbullying and online rage? And that includes, sadly, us Christians, sometimes especially us Christians online. Um, and and again, if we consider how the culture has changed and how we should react to that cultural change, that's maybe something we can all think about. I know, and I have some practical tips for folks. I know how I've changed in my online interactions over 10 years because I certainly used to be guilty of online rage. So why do we need a new apologetic? I hope it's starting to become obvious, and I'm hoping it's starting to become obvious what I mean by the new part. And really, a big part of the answer is to address the new challenges to belief. For the two groups, to the believers, to encourage and strengthen their faith in light of the current challenges to their faith. And similarly to believers and non-believers, to opponents, to break down the barriers in light of the current objections they have and perceive. And I guess it begs the question, what's the point of an apologetic that answers questions and nobody is asking? So yes, we need traditional apologetics. Is there a God? Was Jesus raised from the dead? What's the historical evidence? Absolutely. But if we stay there and they aren't yet the questions that people are asking, for instance, why is the Christian faith good? That is a question that people are asking. If we're not going to talk about the new challenge, are we being stewards of the faith that we've got? Okay, a practical example of why new apologetics is important. This one I found profound. And one of the things they said in the book is we should tell more stories. My kids tell me I should tell less, but anyway, when the new apologists started to hold sway, it came to my mind about whether they would have a reaction that was unanticipated. And I thought it was an actual quote from Admiral Yamamoto, but it turns out that it's not. It's from the film Tora, 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 with the Hollywood putting the words in his mouth, that after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, one of the final scenes of the movie was Yamamoto standing on the bridge of the aircraft, the Japanese aircraft carrier, saying, "I fear all we have done is to awake a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." But it turns out that that line is pretty much based on the writings and of Yamamoto himself. And here are some of the background there, which you can read. But essentially, he's going, "Don't do it. If it's a really quick war, maybe we can win it, but it'll be we're going to have a whirlwind of successions, but anything prolonged, and we're going to really regret it because we will just rouse a sleeping giant." Well, when Christianity was culturally advantageous, then we could be apathetic with our apologetic and with our efforts to explain it and with our intellectual efforts even. And I just see such a parallel between the situation where the Japanese roused a sleeping giant and changed the world with the events post September 11 and the animosity that the four horsemen pictured here raised, and the cultural Christianity that they killed, and the sleeping giants that they actually did rouse, the intellectual giants that they roused, and then in rousing those intellectual giants, whether it's William Lane Craig, a local chapter of Reasonable Faith of which we're attending, and I'm speaking at right now, or whether it's somebody like Tim Keller, in his Reason for God, whether it's Glenn Scrivener, who's a cultural commentator and apologist in Australian in the UK, whether it's Os Guinness, interestingly, great grandson of Sir Arthur Guinness, whose brewery I just went and visited in Ireland with much joy. And of course, these thinking Christians sat on the shoulders of giants like Lewis and Chesterton, Aquinas and Augustine, and they repopularized their work. But here's the unexpected, profound thing. Bear with me. They've produced, so these guys here, all these apologists and so many more, have produced so much online apologetic, intellectual, good, gracious, reasonable online content. Guess what the AI engines have been trained on? They've been trained on so much of this content from the church, awoken from a slumber. And it's amazing. And this was really brought home to me in the Reasonable Faith podcast from July 14 of this year. I've got it linked there. And it turns out, I'm not going to read it all, but it turns out that William Lane Craig was teaching at Biola, and then uh, one of the students came up to him in a break, and uh, and he said, basically, when we go to AI, it gives really good answers to theological questions, and it really just reflects what's out there on the internet and what the AI engines have been trained on. Look, this is not the full story, because certainly for the first initial period, the AI engines, like a dog, they were being trained not to give good theological answers. But that seems to have passed, and the content now and the training seems to be dominating. And so, really, what's happened is through the work of folks like William Lane Craig and all those others and more that I listed, the AI answers for theological and Christian and apologetic questions, you've got to be careful. But the answers are gobsmackingly good in so many of the cases that I'm now seeing. And uh, is it Brian Harris? Who's the other guy on the podcast? The William Lane Craig's host, Kevin Harris. He was saying how he was really shocked to hear the influence this is having on culture, and yet that was exactly what Reasonable Faith's mission is. Isn't it interesting that I wonder if without these new atheists, we'd have as much Christian content online training these engines, and it's just interesting. But those of us of a belief, we think about the story of Joseph in Genesis. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And I have an example of this that we can consider. I asked ChatGPT I'm preparing a presentation on how the Christian gospel might apply, or at least have something to say about a list of modern cultural and technical. You can read it, right? That's my prompt. Help me out with the cultural change and the technological realities. Does the gospel have anything to say about it? Keep that in mind. I'm going to come back to it. But let me tell you, I think you will agree. I got some wonderful later. You'll agree. I got some wonderful answers. So Justin Briley said, "Thank God for Richard Dawkins." He has a whole article worth listening, episode worth listening to on this topic. And but I thank God. I think it's more thank God for these apologists and more. And note, here's a really interesting thing. Going back to part 1 of the book, all of these apologists I listen to and more are far more humble and caring than I'll ever be, but and faithful and learned and intelligent. But I have to say, and I think everybody I know well would agree with me, that I am actually helped by them to be more gracious than I used to be. Hopefully less foolish as well, more reasonable. And when you think these are the guys informing the AI engines and then helping those students that are actually using AI, and believe me, they are using AI to actually answer their questions. I mean, I don't think it's possible to listen to Professor John Lennox, for those of you who know him, and become angry, radical, or violent. It's like Tim Keller says, the list of Amish terrorists is fairly short. And this is why I personally avoid shrill organisations like Australian Christian Lobby. And I know some people here love them, some people do love them. But even though I found myself agreeing with much of what they said, it's their shrill tone, I think, makes them counterproductive. And that goes to part one and part two of what I said in this book. I highlight. I also then went on, I gave AI a whole list of challenges from our current rich Western world. And it said, hey, shall I categorize that for you? And this is Gemini AI, so the Google one. And you can see where I've got an AI input. I've tried to label it here with AI. The images that I've got here are all AI generated, by the way. I said that. And look, it said, why don't we go from the self to the world? So it put things into six buckets: mental and social health, the mental health crisis, especially youth and screens. That's what it put. Value crisis. This is perhaps sometimes especially true for Christians. We don't sometimes realize that Christ would have died for us, even if we'd been the only person on earth. He died for everybody else, but maybe not for us. You can read through these: the loneliness epidemic, the climate change anxiety, technology addiction, what that's doing. And then it moves to sexuality, family, and demographics. I've added in grey there feminism and its toll on boys. We'll get to that. And there's a positive feminism that's true, that's being challenged, obviously, by trans. That's the whole turf war. For those of you who know that acronym, um, uh, trans exclusionary radical feminist. That's J.K. Rowling's label these days. Um, Relativism, so purpose, meaning, and worldview. Lots of our kids and youth and people are trying psychedelics. Um, um, Justin Briley has the whole part of his surprising rebirth of belief in God, which talks about people coming to faith because of psychedelics. Occult and Wicca is certainly growing. Economics, you got the idea that AI has given good information and categorized it. This is a really good tool for actually examining some of these things. You need to be careful for truth. You need to validate things. But this is a good list of what our apologetics needs to address. None of us, no one apologetic can address all these things. But here's the list of things that we can be thinking about or picking a subset to think about. I'm going to do it again by the looks of things, go a little over time, bear with me. Here are some of the things in particular that we could be thinking about. New Age is surprisingly pernicious. I found some US government figures from 2022 show that New Age, which is steeped in Eastern and Buddhism and stuff, Eastern mysticism and Buddhism, that's a really big part of our culture. And it's a big part of our morning shows as well, by the way, which is influencing our culture. And these are some of the core beliefs and the common practices. From the book, New Age is often seen as being more preferential to Christianity, but it really gives more preference to preferences than truth, which is sort of the old lie from Satan, is that you can be God. And there's some useful resources in the book as well about how feminism can be alluring. How New Age can be very attractive to feminism and to the secular form of feminism, where feminism is a worldview. So I'm not talking about feminism as a practical thing within and beyond the church, but feminism that actually acts as a worldview. And New Age can tend to overlap. And the book has, as I said, a number of sections written by women apologists, some of which are directly for and for mothers are actually talking about that. Critical theory, Neil Shenvi, as I said, is a real expert. And And critical theory, which is the basis of woke, if you like, but I'm trying to avoid that word for the moment. Um, it really does act as a worldview. And I think it's topical to say, forget about the political thing at the moment, but Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated earlier today on campus, uh, much of what he would argue about, and I saw him primarily as an apologist, had no until a few months ago didn't know he was as much a MAGA person. So I'm just think of him as an apologist. Most of the time when he was on campus doing the debates, if you've seen any of the clips, he's arguing against the worldview of critical theory and of postmodern religion of social justice on campus, where it is the dominant worldview. And the very nature of contemporary critical theory as an all-encompassing worldview basically brings it in to conflict with Christianity. And in the last quote there, and it has a doctrine of salvation, which is essentially revolution. Contemporary critical theory teaches that our fundamental problem is the power structures that oppress us. And in contrast, Christianity teaches us that our fundamental problem is internal. It's that we're sinners, and so there is just a clash between these things. But unless we actually know something about them, if we just go woke or cultural Marxism and we write people off, we'll never have dialogue and we'll never influence and we'll never have an apologetic that actually influences this mission field. And a few more quotes again from Neil Shenvi. He goes to the point, but being loving and compassionate is necessary but not sufficient. A very loving, compassionate doctor can nonetheless kill his patient if he prescribes the wrong medicine. And 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 it's often, I find, in this, I'm somewhat channeling Tim Keller and Erwin McManus. It's often I'm finding a useful starting point with secular and postmodern friends, with friends who are steeped in woke or critical theory, to try and get them to realize that theirs is functioning as a worldview and that they're not standing on neutral ground like they think they are. If you can be aware enough of their worldview and enter in so that we're not just getting angry and they're not just the enemy, and you can show them that they've got a worldview and yet a worldview that isn't neutral and that doesn't have a starting point that is as given and as obvious if they examine it. Right there, once they realize that there is no neutral, or at least once they start to engage with that thought that there's no neutral, let me tell you, the tone of the conversation just changes. Another one is the mental health crisis. This is just, for so many of the reasons in those 6 categories, mental health crisis is just so pervasive throughout our rich Western world. Many times, it's medical. Many times, it's medical with environment, and that's where the environment of the culture we come into play comes into play. And Jordan Peterson, and I've seen this in people I care about. Jordan Peterson said that in his clinical practice, if he could just start getting his patients to keep a standard wake up time in the morning, there was a good percentage, not all, but there was a good percentage of them that almost were completely healed over time from that single thing. This is not to downplay whatsoever the medical side. I'm just saying that it's like my wife suffers from multiple sclerosis. We know that that's a medical autoimmune disease. We also know that there's cultures in the world where fish eating cultures like the Inuit Indians and the Japanese, where it almost is never diagnosed. That's just a reality of the world we live in. And particularly for the mental health crisis, and the book touches on this, um, is that for people who are struggling with mental health, sometimes being a Christian can actually make things worse. And there's a book by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, 12 Christian Beliefs Will Drive You Crazy, that does a really good uh, 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 depth into some of these misunderstood parts of Scripture. And you'll see the example here of Lucy, that no matter how hard I prayed, I never got better. I was sick of praying about it, and I felt like a failure because my prayers weren't answered. I, I'm going to go a little bit over. Kevin, can I go another 10 minutes or 5 minutes? What have I got? Kevin?
Sorry, I have to unmute. 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. Here is another thing that I have discovered recently. And this is a secular thing, not just a Christian thing. We know that our young men are doing psychedelics. We know that they're looking at occult. We know that they're trying all sorts of things. I didn't realize the extent to which our young boys and young men are being left behind. For any of you who know Prof G, so Scott Galloway, some of my friends, my secular friends, listened to him and were actually surprised and delighted that I'd actually listened to him as well. I hadn't realized the depth to which this was true. Scott Galloway tells his story. Of all the people I hear from most of this topic, the ones I hear from most and the most supportive are mothers. And it goes something like this. I have 3 kids, 2 daughters and 1 son. One's at Penn, that's Penn State University, and the other daughter is in PR in Chicago. And my son's in the basement vaping and playing video games. On any metric, young men are doing worse and have fallen faster than anybody. And I want to be empathy, zero. I want to be clear. Empathy is not a zero-sum game. He goes on to say that the gains in women's status in education, etc., is a wonderful thing. But he then goes on to say that nobody has any empathy for these young boys and these young men who are falling behind. And he laments it. I was gobsmacked to find in my feed, my tech feed here, Cold Fusion, this Cold Fusion podcast. He gives the stats, and this is from 13 days ago, so it's very timely. He gives some of the stats that are becoming very, very obvious and hard to ignore. And 20s and 30s aren't even trying to date anymore. It's too hard. 20 and 30-year-old boys aren't even trying to date. Too hard, too risky, especially since the Me Too movement. So porn's being used as a substitute. They're falling out of the labour market. Not even in traditional male industries. They're being replaced by women, or at least competing with women. They have increasingly few friends, and friendlessness is increasing. And yeah, we should all, this is terrible news for women, because to channel Jordan Peterson, there aren't going to be any good men for women. And in fact, what's happening is that women are marrying older, which is making it even worse for this particular demographic. And Jordan Peterson says, if you're worried about what strong men are going to do to the world, you want to wait till you get a generation or two of angry, weak men. And this probably partially explains why young men are turning up at church. Look, there's a new apologetic here. It's not honed, but if the Gospels claim that Christ loves his church, and the Christ will build his church, wouldn't at least hint at the truth and the goodness of the Scriptures if it turned out that attendance was actually positive and flourishing for the flourishing of human beings? In this case, maybe young men. Well, Justin Briley, in his, I just looked at AI and said, hey, what does Justin Briley say about this in his podcast series about the surprising rebirth of faith in God? And there is so much sociological evidence about how good church is for society, for flourishing, for community, for mental health. AI and job losses are starting to happen. It's happening. We need, and I certainly don't yet, have a good, well thought out apologetic answer or encouragement for those industries where job losses are starting to happen. And if you go back and look at my 2018 church at Reasonable Faith Adelaide here on AI, you'll see that onshoring, taking all the call center jobs back into rich countries like Australia and automating them away with AI would be a likelihood. That's starting to happen in the Philippines and in Vietnam, and you can have a look at the economic repercussions in those countries. I said to you earlier that I put in this prompt to ChatGPT. I asked it to give me some, here's my list of issues. Can you give me any apologetic answers? I now regularly have young people ask me, is AI going to be conscious? And that leads to awesome apologetic conversations about what it is to be human, what it is to have value as a human being. Are the disabled valued? Are the old? Is euthanasia okay then? What about the unborn? Like, where do we extend? Where do we extend? What does personhood gain us? Fascinating conversations, vastly different to what they were 5 years ago. But here's what AI got back. The gospel affirms that human dignity and worth are rooted in being and made in God's image. AI may simulate intelligence, but it does not carry personhood, moral agency, or the breath of God. This guards against both idolatry, treating machines as saviors or equals, and reductionism, treating humans as mere machines. Oh my gosh, that's from ChatGPT verbatim. I hope I'm not the only one who finds this awesome. And similarly, I don't have time. I've left no time to go into the other couple here for wisdom, uh, worldly knowledge and divine wisdom, and antinatalism. I don't know if you know this is a thing. You've probably got grandkids or kids that don't want to have babies, don't want to have kids, and hear from AI. Give me something apologetic to talk about antinatalism. And it comes back with this: hope versus despair. Antinatalism arises from a sense that life is too full of suffering to justify bringing new life into the world. The gospel acknowledges deep suffering, Romans 8, but offers a vision of hope, redemption, and resurrection that affirms life as a gift, not a curse. How good is this? It goes on. I've got to skip some of these, but all sorts of anxiety. Maybe we don't need a new apologetic encompassing war, famine, disease, uncertainty, anxiety. But what about a resurrected one from 1948? If you haven't ever recommended to a young person on Living in an Atomic Age by C.S. Lewis, can I recommend it to you? And a resurrected apologetic? Yeah, pun intended. Summary. So what's new? Much is new in the apologetics that the book is espousing and that I'm encouraging. The tone, the listening, the understanding, they're not new, but the importance and the critical nature of them is new. And we should all expect and embrace change. Look at Isaiah 43:19. I'm doing a new thing, not I'm doing an old thing. Nothing is going to change. Look, I'm making a way in the wilderness. Do you perceive it? And look, this certainly drives the need for a new apologetic. And the pace of change is increasing. So I asked Sora to give me a graphic that showed increasing pace of change and angst. I thought that was quite an amusing diagram. And I also asked it to try and give me something that says that Christians should be courageous and not be afraid of change so that we can help our society, particularly our kids, grandkids, nephew, nieces, the young folks that we worship with, work with, come into contact with at the coffee shop or the caravan park. And it really, and this Sora image really did bring back to me that I really love the resources of the gospel and of our faith to enable us to engage with the world as it really is and to help us gain wisdom. Resources of the gospel. There's a quote to take away if you don't remember anything else. There's something that's attractive about the gospel, the resources, be it forgiveness, hope, redemption. Like they're the things to concentrate on. Anyway, some sermonizing ahead. How can we be heard if we're easily dismissed? What about the philosophers if Paul didn't know Greek? Shouldn't our goal as apologists be to demonstrate the timeless power and the hope of the gospel? Then isn't engaging and truly understanding the unique challenges of 2025, things like digital isolation, the mental health crisis, the search for meaning, and the other issues raised in this challenge? Isn't this a necessary component for engaging our culture and for communicating our faith to our kids, grandkids? And if we don't grasp these modern struggles and we get written off as being dinosaurs, nothing we say makes an impact, right? Probably maybe shouldn't. Anyway, we can examine our online approach, examine our online presence, say hi to a young person, and use this presentation and the book as a resource. And we all have a role to play. This, especially, I think, is true for those of us who are older. And like Frodo, we might wish to be born in simpler times, but as Gandalf replies, so does everybody who lives in such disquieting times. But that's not for us to decide. All we have to do is to decide what to do with the time given us. And as a reminder to myself, to me, whom much is given, yep, this is pressing because it's sort of required of us, right? We have the wisdom to share if we've made many mistakes, and we have much to communicate and much to equip the younger generations with. And so we do need a new apologetic, and because much is required. And again, I thought it was ironic when tried to look for Luke 12:48 in Google, and it came back with the right reference, but it also says, and it's become a widely recognized idiom, famously paralleled in Spider-Man. I thought that was a good place to conclude. They're the resources. Thanks, guys. Sorry for going over time.
Thank you, Tom. I'll just go through the chat. I'll find it. Where's chat? Show chat previews. Initial comment from Charles. I've been coming to realise that people believe what they want to believe. It seems to me that this ties in with the quest for meaning. People find confirmation in their beliefs and also a collection of others who share those beliefs. I don't know how to address such worldviews. Did you want to talk to that, Charles?
Yeah, there's a great. Oh, sorry, Charles. Please, after you.
You're on mute, Charles.
Now I've got the right button. Yeah, it was just, I just see this so often that people say, well, look, this is what I believe. And it really doesn't matter what you say. You don't touch their worldview. And their worldview is confirmed by the meaning it gives them in terms of their relevance or their understanding of their place in the world. And it also gives them a group of people who affirm that position. And I don't know how to get started on that.
That's so true. There's two sections in the book that actually talk directly to this. The relationship. There's also a section where they talk about how relationship and authority, and actually even the comments about relativism are relevant as well. If it's a younger person, they could well be a relativist. Amongst my dear secular friends, I regularly have one mate, if he ever listens to this, he'll recognize himself, who says, oh, the universe wanted this. I'm going, mate, when you say that, I hear my kitchen table wanted this, because it's just the same time, space, energy, and matter component in your kitchen table as it is for the universe writ large. And we've been friends since first year high school. And I never thought he was ever, or him or any of my other mates were hearing me. But as I've skilled up to be able to learn more about relativism, their worldview, a little while ago, I was out on a bike ride for one of my mates, and he said, hey, Tom, I've been thinking about that stuff about personal value and meaning and stuff. And when you said that your value, I'm starting to listen and read books about that. I'd like to talk to you more. This is 20 years later. But all of a sudden now he can hear. But if I didn't have that relationship, if I didn't know and care so much about his life, if we hadn't had dialogue, none of those opportunities. My pastor can't have that conversation. My pastor says, show me who your friends are and I'll show you who you're becoming. And he really nuances it. And I know he doesn't mean it. Sometimes he nuances it because he's not wrong, but it's not complete. But he can't have that conversation. That's us in the congregation seats to have that congregation. And in fact, there's one section where the apologist, I think the urban apologist, laments that his Christian friends haven't had conversation. Remember the last time he'd actually had an apologetic conversation with a non-Christian. No, okay. Set, audience number one, apologetics. We've got to build each other up, right? In faith. And in fact, I had one question there. One question that one of the takeaways that I breezed through was here's a takeaway. Why not this week at church find a young person and ask them a really strange question? A strange question like, hey, how's your faith journey? Do you know if we ever do that at church? Because everybody I ask, how's your faith journey? Where are you at? What are your current challenges, mate? Who's asking you? You? Nobody else? No. Why not? Why don't we do that? And I don't say it as a criticism, I say it as an encouragement. So Charles, you're so right. But this book identifies exactly the question you're asking and gives some resources. They're not suddenly going to convert your anti-theist grandkids or my non-believing son. But boy, oh boy, are there ways of putting pebbles in boots. Is that helpful?
Charles?
Yeah, that's thank you. That's a lead in. Thanks.
I just added a comment. Believing what you want to believe seems dangerous. Shouldn't you believe what is true? And Charles came back, agreed. But what if people are
Yeah,
not?
but you got your truth and I've got mine.
Yeah. Well, so what? You can have your truth if you want to call it such, but if it's not true, well, you're in trouble.
Well,
I think Tom's already talked about that.
So Tom just touched on something which I've been thinking about recently, and that is the lost art of mentorship. So he talked about going up to the younger member of the congregation and challenging them as to how is your faith going. If somebody did that to me, not that I'm young anymore, I would probably take a step back and think, well, what right have you got to ask me that? But on deeper reflection, you've got every right to ask me that, because it's the sort of challenge that we need. But any effort to mentor our younger brothers and sisters.
I don't think it comes down to right. I think it comes down to responsibility. I think we have a responsibility to pass on the faith and to look after the younger generations. But here's the thing: the reason I put in the slides, and I'm sorry, I really apologise for I didn't do the timings of my presentation much better tonight, because I would have spent more time on what's happening with our young men. It's a huge opportunity. And Bronwyn, at the moment, I guess I'm talking to the guys here, right? I think there's a similar dynamic that probably is in play for women and for girls, but you'd appreciate I'm not as familiar with that situation, right?
Oh, good.
But there is a crisis with our young men, but there is also a huge opportunity. They are looking for guidance. They are looking for mentorship. I'm actually really blessed as part of my day job. Again, to quote my pastor, he says, "Don't retire, refire." And that means go and do something different. And in my case, I'm actually still working in IT, but I've got the joy of mentoring 2 or 3 or 4 young IT guys. And I got to tell you, I happened into that, but it's an absolute joy. And Derek, to your point, I'll illustrate with a story. Again, it says in the book you should tell stories, right? I'll illustrate with a story. A number of years ago, we started just having an open house on a Wednesday night, and we just invited, basically doors were open. And how that ended up, we had just a whole heap of kids from church come around, and they came for my wife's cooking, and then they'd sort of stay to either play games, and then quite often talk with me, and sometimes debate with me. And in the end, I learned to ask, how's your battle with porn going? And do you know what? Every time, not in a group, but one-on-one, and do you know what? Every single time that conversation ended with, "Thank you so much for asking, because I'm on my own here." Well, now you've got a church kid going to church, and he's got all these doubts because he's got all these relativist friends at uni, and he's got this really nice Hindu mate, right? Or he's fancying that Indian lady who's an who's into Eastern religion, and now he's battling with our church. And when we ask him about his faith journey, we ask him after he's left church, and we lament. I'm trying to make the argument that we have a responsibility to be asking. It's not an intrusion, and I've got to tell you, it's one of the biggest blessings. Here, because I have been blessed, improving. The more I listen, and the more I try and enter into somebody else's world, the more useful I find, and the greater joy it actually is. I'll give you another example. There was a young lady at the camp that I talked about earlier. She is courageous. She previously identified as a man, and she is part of this church community, and she's as broken as everybody else. But boy, is she courageous. You know what was fascinating was she was telling me about her journey, and it was all relationship. She said, you said what made it so hard is the moment you start having these questions, you find an online online group, and all of a sudden you're special. You have a community and they're all egging you on. So to leave that community, oh boy, she took some courage. So she's just underscoring the importance of relationship and courage. By the way, I think it's the number one command in the Bible is oft repeated command is fear, be courageous. Don't fear that can just kill the body. It's a great example with what happened in Utah today. Only fear that can kill the soul, the spirit. Anyway, I hope that's useful, Derek, and please take it as an encouragement. You will be surprised. I guarantee it.
It is. No, thank
Tom, when I was young, like when I came to the youth
Somebody?
group that I got involved in, the couple that were running that, they had an open house policy, literally, and they went any time of night, day or night, you could rock up to their house, and they'd be there for you.
Yeah.
And that was very special. And they had a real gift. I would say actually abused by some people in the church. They stood up for some kids that or a girl that was getting sexually abused by someone in the church. They got excommunicated in Adelaide.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that they pretty, I won't say names, but the wife, the mother in this, youth group mother, she passed away, and there was a lot of people there. I wrote a little card to her husband to say how much it meant to me, them being there for us, right? Which was really moving for him. But before she passed away, one of the girls who had a few Christians in the youth group managed to stay with God, managed to be with her in the last few days of her life and encourage her back to her relationship with God, right? So pointed, to the point where she was saying, does God really love me? Right. And my friend was able to affirm her that yes, he does, So it sort of came around.
Yeah.
And it was very moving to hear that my friend Mandy was able to speak into her life like that, with this amazing couple that did so much for not just the church but the community at large. So yeah, it does. We need more people like that are prepared to sacrifice a little bit of sleep and be there for people with an open door. You do have to be unique to be able to actually. I mean, everyone can try that type of stuff if they're in that position. So, but yeah.
No, that's cool. And again, I've only touched and trying to give you a flavor of the book, but there are sections there on spiritual. It's a really real world contemporary book. There is a whole section there on spiritual abuse and stuff as well. And because that's real. And let's face it, when I'm talking to the guy in Ireland and he's telling me about the fact that he's a relativist, and I think about the Catholic child abuse scandals, I'm going, well,
no, that's right.
I can't blame him. I mean,
No.
it's not unreasonable. At least it's not an unreasonable reaction, but what we try to do with people is get them to make a response. A response is a much more thought out than do a reaction. And he was describing to me, he said, it's the fact that it was covered up.
Yeah.
It wasn't even the fact that it was done.
Yeah,
It was
that's
the
right.
fact that they tried to cover it up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you've got to point people back to grace, basically, and to Jesus, in all those situations,
Yeah.
rather than
I let it go, but I could have asked him, well, please don't make any ought statements for the rest of the talk.
Yeah.
Because he was, both the talks we went on in Ireland from the two Irishmen, they were both very, very secular and very, very preachy. So it was interesting. So it's a palpable thing in that country. Same as in Germany. The moment we got off in Berlin, it is very hard to be an Orthodox Christian in Berlin. We have it comfortable here in Australia compared. Oh boy,
Wow.
very hard. And it was fascinating trying to be. In fact, Jill and I found ourselves being encouragers to people, whether they're in government. There was one guy in journalism who I had great conversation with, really intelligent guy. Boy, oh boy, does he cop it. And then he feels like he's unfaithful because he can't write well, really hard. But yet I ended up saying we need grace and we need wisdom and we need you to be engaged. Otherwise,
Doesn't Germany have a speaker's corner though? Like you can stand and preach on? Is that in some of those countries?
But let me tell you, you got to be careful. I mean, look at what's happening in the UK with the comedian just being locked up for his tweets. So it's let me just say, it's a lot more comfortable here than what I observed and learned in Germany.
Yeah. All right.
Yep. Kevin?
I was just going to add, freedom of speech is probably one of the issues not addressed here. Sometimes discussion of apologetic death today of a prominent Christian in America, which has more of a freedom of speech, sort of in the wrong direction in some ways. You have to be very careful when you bring up stuff or who you bring it up with. Yeah.
Yes, but I would say this doesn't need to be part of our new apologetic, because don't we have this clearly in Acts? Don't we have this clearly from Acts 1 and 2 and the life and death of the Apostle Paul and the other apostles? I don't think this is new apologetic. I think this is some of the resources of the gospel we have to not feel like we're odd. This is a normal part of the Christian life until Christendom.
Yeah.
We have tremendous resources to draw upon there.
Yeah. So I suppose for me, it sort of highlights a bit, gets back to knowing your audience, you know. I've sort of been challenged a bit more recently to sort of get more of a grip on my understanding of what Islam means and Hinduism, and so that I can engage with the because I do have relationships with some of them, having to try and broach or discuss those things. So and even the kids too, so that I've got a bit more of a grip at Christmas time when I go to launch in about. I can sort of, you know, be cunning and pull them. So
that's it.
Yeah,
that's old apologetics as well. And again, not at all outdated. More
it's funny
critical,
because I've been
less.
doing this research on the Trinity, because a lot of Muslims don't believe in the Trinity, and I sort of slipped into what you do is a bit like a rabbit hole down on in YouTube and stuff, on some really good apologists that are dealing with they call themselves Trinitarians, but the funny thing is I thought all Christians were Trinitarians. I'm going, what? It's like I'm trying to get my head around it. It's very weird. But anyway, it's another topic.
Yeah, I'm sure there's been reasonable faith presentations on that. More than one, I'm sure. I'm confident.
Yeah, well.
I once had a fascinating taxi ride in Sydney with a Greek Cypriot Unitarian.
Okay.
Fascinating discussion we had at the time.
So
Yeah.
but Armenians are Unitarian. No, they're not Unitarian. They believe that Christ is the firstborn, right?
Well, Unitarians have got different ways.
Yeah, all,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Mm.
pretty much the whole mainstream of Christianity is Trinitarian, and that's sort of one of the markers of what is, because that was one of the arguments that we had in the
When you
early
say we, you're
church.
obviously older than me.
But it's interesting how these old arguments seem to come up and rear their little heads, you know, in different either be religions. Well, Islam will, if you get into a discussion with a Muslim, they will bring up the Trinity, right? So you have to have some grip on, you know, basically what the Quran does say about. Well, they try and unpack they try the Angel, which is what the Gospels called. The Gospels are called in Islam by Muhammad or by Allah. They try and say that it's been corrupted. So it doesn't matter what you say about the Gospels or what Jesus said, it's been corrupted. So you've got to bring in what the Quran actually says about the references to the Old Testament and the Angel, right? So he or God, Allah supposedly affirms the previous writings, the previous texts that are given to the Jews and to Christians. So if you've got those those scriptures, this is probably more to adults, I suppose.
Yeah.
Those scriptures know about them, you can sort of say, well, he's already affirmed the scriptures, so you know that's a start anyway. So that's one of them that you've got to sort of have your head around. But
And then just think about the wide variety of how Christians understand the variations across Muslim communities and other religions.
yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah. I was intrigued by the fact that like in Islam, Jesus is coming back, right? They believe Jesus is coming back. Well, I heard one apologist say to a Muslim, say, well, if Muhammad died and he was buried, Jesus rose from the grave, but Jesus is the one who's coming back. Why, if Muhammad was bigger and more important than Jesus, why is Muhammad coming back? And that's actually Jesus.
Quran is that the image that you get of Jesus in the Quran is better than the image you get of Muhammad in the Quran.
Yeah. But bringing it back to this topic, I mean, that's what I feel like when you talk about a new apologetic. You've just got to know which area you're sort of dipping your feet into, right? And ask the Holy Spirit to help you to, you know, get a grip on it.
And that applies to
I didn't do the last section well because of timing, but I certainly wasn't become an AI expert and a mental health expert and a women's issues expert and no, that's not what I was trying to say.
No.
I was trying to say, and I think we as the body have a responsibility to engage in some or be aware of some of those things so that we can make a contribution to the kingdom.
Yeah. The Bible does have answers to these things. They're not new. You know, when Solomon says, you know, there's nothing new under the sun, right? You know,
it's so close to putting this in. Cheryl and
to
McManus
me,
did-
like
oh,
even if talking about
sorry.
pornography or just being addicted to screens, right? Well, Bible tells us every good report, think of line, thinking of positive stuff, and then the God of peace will be with you, that type of thing. I mean, they're little bits, that's a paraphrase. But yeah, the little bits that
McManus got
help.
himself into a lot of trouble because he gave a series which was broadcast on Ecclesiastes, and he said something along the lines of, "Right, Solomon, there's nothing new under the sun." He said, "Space travel, that seems to be a bit new, Solomon. The internet, that seems to be a bit new." Well, there was a Christian pile-on for old Erwin McManus, right? And of course, he didn't mean that there wasn't anything new in the human condition,
No.
or that there wasn't great wisdom in what the teacher was saying in Ecclesiastes. But what he meant was that actually we don't live in that time, and there are new things in the world that antibiotics, that's sort of new, right? The pill, that's sort of
Moses
The
had
human
2 tablets.
condition, it's the human condition, I suppose, depression, anxiety, loneliness, they are all common to generations. Yeah.
Loneliness.
Well,
Loneliness
yes,
epidemic.
I would say everyone in every generation would have certain, just ask people going through the Great Depression, or soldiers coming back from World War II. They would have experienced
No, loneliness wasn't
Yeah.
Sorry, Brian.
Yeah, I just think they would have experienced loneliness in the sense of not being able to talk about what they've gone through, Yeah, I mean, it's a different type of loneliness, but
it's not a loneliness epidemic like we have now.
no, probably not.
But even space travels in the Bible. In Acts chapter 1, when Jesus ascended up into the heavens, he went up past the clouds and on. Space travel.
What about Philip when he disappeared and appeared somewhere else?
That's just what's the term?
Transformation?
Teleportation. Teleportation. That's the word. Yeah.
I was thinking Brianism. Anyway,
having trouble with the audio breakup. Has other people been having the same problem?
Mostly not.
No, I'm fine.
Oh, so it's just my system. Yeah, okay.
Hey, Luke, you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Yep. I just wanted to thank you for a really great talk. There was a lot that I took away from that, a lot of found relevant personally and also with discussions I've had with people. So it was very, very beneficial.
Oh, good. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't fishing for a compliment. That's good.
No, but
Yeah,
but there's a lot I've taken away from that. So.
Oh, good. Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Any questions or any things that particularly were relevant that you could the relativism or the trans issues?
Oh well, I could speak about a lot of that. Well, I've currently got a situation in my family with one of my brothers who's gone down the LGBT path, and that's been a constant point of challenge. Trying to find ways to speak in a way that he can know that he's loved, but that to be able to for him to have a sense that he's actually can be loved, but not how to put
agreed
it. Agreed with, like in his positions. So loved as a person, but not like that. I don't tolerate the I don't accept the belief and the conclusions he's come to. But at the same time, that's been a challenge. Also, the AI discussion was actually fascinating, and it's kind of given me quite a lot of hope in that area, because that's been a great concern for me. the influx.
In terms of the personhood, the implications, or in terms of the jobs?
Well, I mean, even like the way it's been informed by like the apologetics arguments on the internet, and I guess like some of the dialogue, the answers that it was actually given, and I've seen like with younger people how reliant they are on it,
Yeah.
and it kind of gives me a bit of hope in that area.
Yeah. Do you have friends that have got AI companions?
Not I don't know about like just using the search engines. Yeah.
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 That's something I didn't raise, but
Not like the actual yeah, I guess you could say companion. Like I haven't known anyone that has actually got like the, what do you call it, persona, like personas, like or what do you call them?
I missed those on my list. I should have put those in.
But
actually.
yeah, like that's a whole other world. That
it is. And Bronwyn, there's a good question you can ask in the teaching. How many of you guys have AI companions? What year do you teach?
I got 3, 4, so hopefully none.
Oh yeah. Okay.
AI parents?
They better not be.
But Luke, yeah, it'd be interesting if you asked around your mates and that, like, or younger folks that you know.
I mean, no, like like I've had discussions with people about like general AI use, and we've shared similar concerns about the development, which as I expressed, the conversation tonight has shown a bit more hope on that situation. But I haven't had discussions with people about the kind of the personas, companions, or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So I'd be interested to next time we speak, if you ask around, you might be surprised that a few more people have that you don't know.
Is more
Your
common
age,
than
younger.
people like to admit.
Yeah. And Luke, back to the two other issues, the AI issue. I'm actually really surprised that the guys on the Think Biblically Cultural Update, they do a really good job on AI. I'm actually surprised. They do a really good job, but they are sitting at a university, and they have people in the arts, they have people in the sciences, theology. So and they're humble enough to ask a lot of questions. And I say this as a tech AI sort of person, right? But I've been delighted by the podcast I've been doing. But if you want a graceful, useful set of discussions around the whole trans and homosexual area, Sean McDowell and Viola, I don't know if you subscribe to Sean McDowell. He's asking all the hard questions. He's got trans folks and homosexual folks that he gets onto his show.
I mean, like,
and he's very useful.
Without going into too much information, like, I never went down that path myself, but I personally completely understand where it stems from. Like there's we've had like a raised by just a single mum, and I've seen the effects that has actually had on the family. And yeah, and I can see that, and but trying to address the issues and all that in a way where I can be loving and express that he's cared about, but not going along with any accepting pronouns and
they do it.
affirming him, and
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, if you're looking for resources or you got questions, Sean does some great conversations with that you might find. Just be aware, just tuck it at the back of your mind. If you need some resources that are both biblically based and real world, he's a great guy to Google and look at some of his stuff.
I'll look into that.
Yeah, and the book is very good. I'd recommend the book. Would be worth your time.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, I think it's about time we should end the recording. If I can find the spot. Yep. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Tom.
Thanks,
And
Tom.
stirred up a fair bit of discussion. So at this point, I'll stop the recording for the YouTube viewers.